My family demanded I put down my dog after my nephew dragged him by the collar and seriously injured him. Now they're crying when the cops are on my side. The first time my 13-year-old nephew Conrad spotted my rescue dog Mushu, his eyes lit up. I warned him that he had to be gentle because Mushu was still traumatized from his previous owner, but he didn't care. Moments later, I saw him cornering Mushu in the kitchen, pulling his ears and tail hard enough that Mushu started yelping. "Conrad, I told you to be gentle!" I yelled out, grabbing his wrist to stop him. His mother Gloria watched me grab him and immediately pushed me aside. "Okay, no. You do not touch my son. He was literally just playing," she argued. I took a deep breath to calm myself and knelt down to comfort Mushu. Gloria rolled her eyes. "You treat that dog better than people. Just keep your kid away from my dog," I said, not willing to argue. Things just started settling down when Conrad snuck a fork from the kitchen and started poking at Mushu again when he thought no one was looking. I confiscated the fork and said, "You wouldn't like it if I poked you with a fork too, right? So don't do it to a dog." Gloria overheard me and gave a disgusted expression. "Now you're lecturing my son?" "Well, I wouldn't be lecturing if he actually listened," I replied. "Well, maybe you shouldn't be so sensitive over a fork," she shouted. I was speechless. It felt like I was arguing with a person whose IQ was below room temperature. Completely pointless. So I gently moved Mushu to my bedroom and locked the door, thinking I could at least keep him safe for the rest of the party. But Conrad had seen where I placed the keys. So while the adults were busy playing cards, Conrad stole the keys from my purse and dragged Mushu out into the garage by the collar. He then lined up tiny firecrackers on the floor beside Mushu and lit it up. "It's funny how scared he gets," Conrad said while filming on his phone. Mushu tried to escape, but Conrad blocked his path. That's when Mushu, in pure terror, bit Conrad's arm and drew blood. The entire family froze when we heard Conrad scream. We all rushed toward the sound, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Conrad was on the ground, clutching his forearm while Mushu cowered in the corner, shaking violently. The smell of firecracker smoke hung in the air, and I could see the burnt paper scattered across the concrete floor. Conrad's phone was still recording from where it had fallen. Gloria pushed past me and dropped to her knees beside Conrad. "That beast attacked my baby!" She tried to pull Conrad's hand away to see the wound. There were deep puncture marks embedded on his arm. My dad grabbed a broom, trying to keep Mushu cornered while Gloria pressed on the wound. My mother stood in the doorway, hand over her mouth. "I told you that dog was dangerous," she said through her tears. My dad helped her take Conrad to her car and rushed to get him to the ER. From the hospital, she called animal control, sending pictures of Conrad's wound as proof. Within an hour, they were at my door with a seizure order. The officer looked stern until I showed him the security footage from my home cameras, as well as the recording from Conrad's own phone. His entire demeanor changed as he watched Conrad terrorize Mushu with forks and firecrackers. They called Gloria, letting her know they would not be taking my dog. She was furious and started making every possible threat on the call. "I'm reporting the animal shelter for corruption. You're choosing a dog over a child. Fine. If you won't do anything, I'll get justice myself." 20 minutes later, Gloria showed up in front of my house with boxes of fireworks. I watched from my window as she started setting up 12 rockets on the street, aimed directly at my house. "Let's see how your precious dog likes it when it's your house," she grinned. I grabbed my phone and my dog and hid in a bathtub, hoping it would protect us. I called 911, sobbing. "My sister's trying to shoot fireworks at my house. Please hurry." The police arrived just as Gloria was lighting the first rocket. One officer tackled her and stomped out the flame. Gloria screamed, "You don't understand! It's her dog that's the problem, not me." She fought against the handcuffs. Just as she screamed, one of the fireworks the officers had missed suddenly went off and shot up into the night sky before exploding with a boom that rattled my windows. I stayed crouched in the bathtub with Mushu pressed against my chest, both of us shaking as the sound echoed through the neighborhood. My ears were ringing so bad I could barely hear Officer Holt's voice on his radio calling for backup and a fire crew. Through the bathroom window, I could see red and blue lights flashing across my ceiling as his partner wrestled Gloria to the ground on my front lawn. She was still screaming something, but I couldn't make out the words over the ringing in my ears. Mushu whimpered and burrowed his head under my arm, his whole body trembling. I kept one hand on his back and used the other to check my phone, making sure the 911 call had gone through and help was actually coming. Within minutes, I heard sirens getting louder and louder until it sounded like half the police department was on my street. I peeked out the bathroom window and counted 3 more police cars pulling up, then a massive fire truck that blocked most of the road. Officers in dark uniforms were running around stomping out the remaining lit fuses on the fireworks Gloria had set up. 2 firefighters in heavy gear were checking my neighbor's bushes with flashlights, looking for any sparks that might have caught. I carefully stood up, keeping Mushu close to me, and made my way through the house to the back door. The front was too chaotic with all the emergency vehicles, and I didn't want Mushu anywhere near the flashing lights or the noise. I carried him through the kitchen and out the back door, then around the side of the house to get inside through the garage. He was shaking so hard I could feel his heartbeat racing against my arms. Once we were safely inside, I set him down in the living room, and he immediately ran to hide under the coffee table. I grabbed a blanket and draped it over the table to make it darker and more den-like for him. My hands were shaking as I tucked the edges of the blanket around the table legs. Someone knocked hard on my front door and I jumped, my heart pounding. I walked over and looked through the peephole to see Officer Holt standing there with his notepad out. I opened the door and he asked me to step outside to give a statement about what happened. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto my porch, and I realized I was sweating despite the temperature. I started explaining everything from the beginning. How Conrad had been hurting Mushu earlier today, how Mushu bit him in self-defense, how animal control came and then reversed their decision after seeing the videos. Officer Holt was writing everything down in his notepad, nodding as I talked. I told him about Gloria's threatening phone call and how she showed up 20 minutes later with boxes of fireworks. He asked me to send him copies of all my security footage, and I pulled out my phone right there to forward the files. He also wanted Conrad's phone video that showed him lighting the firecrackers around Mushu, the one animal control had already watched. My voice was shaking as I explained how I hid in the bathtub, because I didn't know what else to do. Officer Holt looked up from his notepad and told me I did the right thing by calling 911 and staying safe. He said he needed me to send those video files as soon as possible for evidence. I could hear Gloria screaming from somewhere nearby, and when I looked past Officer Holt, I saw her in the back of a police car. Her face was pressed against the window, red and twisted with rage. She was yelling something about me choosing a dangerous animal over my own nephew. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard her screaming that everyone would know what kind of person I am. Neighbors had come out of their houses and were standing on their porches or in their driveways watching everything unfold under the streetlights. I recognized Hannah from 2 houses down and Mr. Avery from across the street. They were all staring at the scene, at the police cars and fire truck and Gloria in handcuffs. I felt my face burning with shame even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. Officer Holt asked for my phone again and I handed it over with the security footage already pulled up and ready to play. He stood there on my porch watching the whole thing, his expression getting harder as he saw Conrad pulling Mushu's ears and tail in the kitchen, then later with the fork, then finally in the garage with the firecrackers. The video showed Conrad blocking Mushu's escape and laughing while Mushu tried to get away from the explosions. When Officer Holt got to the part where Mushu bit Conrad's arm, he paused the video and replayed that section twice. Then he watched Conrad's own phone recording that showed the same scene from a different angle. Officer Holt handed my phone back and told me this evidence clearly showed what really happened. He said the videos prove Conrad was hurting Mushu on purpose, and that Gloria's actions tonight were planned and dangerous. He explained that she was going to face serious charges for what she did with those fireworks. The fire crew was still walking around my property with their equipment, checking every inch of my house and yard. One of them called out that they found scorch marks on the vinyl siding near my garage. I walked over with Officer Holt to look, and sure enough, there was a black streak where one of the rockets had grazed the side of my house before exploding in the street. The firefighter took pictures with his phone and wrote notes on a clipboard. Another firefighter was over at my neighbor's hedge with a small fire extinguisher, putting out a brush fire that had started from the sparks. The fire captain came over and explained they were documenting all the property damage and fire hazard for their report. He took more photos of the scorch marks and measured the distance from where Gloria had set up the fireworks to where they hit. I heard a car pulling up fast and turned to see my parents' sedan screeching to a stop behind one of the police cars. My mother jumped out before my father even had the car in the park. Conrad was in the back seat with his arm wrapped in white bandages. My mother took one look at all the police cars and the fire truck and immediately started yelling. She marched straight toward Officer Holt, demanding to know why Gloria was arrested when her grandson was the one who got hurt. Her voice was shrill and angry as she pointed at the police car where Gloria was sitting. Officer Holt held up his hand and asked her to calm down, so he could explain the situation. My father got out of the car more slowly, looking exhausted and defeated. He put his hand on my mother's shoulder and quietly asked everyone to calm down, so we could sort this out. He looked like he had aged 10 years since this afternoon. His shoulders were slumped and there were dark circles under his eyes. Officer Holt explained in a calm voice that the evidence clearly shows Conrad hurt the dog on purpose, and that Gloria committed multiple crimes tonight by trying to shoot fireworks at my house. My mother started to argue, but my father squeezed her shoulder and she went quiet. Officer Holt showed them some of the footage on my phone, the parts where Conrad was tormenting Mushu. My mother's face went pale as she watched, but she didn't say anything else. My father just looked down at the ground and shook his head slowly. The whole street was still lit up with emergency lights, and I could see more neighbors coming out to watch. I went back inside to check on Mushu and found him still hiding under the coffee table with the blanket draped over it. I lay down on the floor next to him and reached under to pet his head. He licked my hand once but didn't come out. I stayed there with him until I heard the police cars and fire truck finally start to leave. The next morning, I woke up to someone knocking on my door. Mushu was sleeping in his crate in my bedroom, finally calm after the chaos of last night. I looked through the peephole and saw Officer Ursula Duffy from Animal Control standing on my porch with a clipboard. I opened the door and she explained she was here to follow up on the bite incident from yesterday. She came inside and I showed her to the living room where we sat down. Officer Duffy explained that because Mushu did break skin when he bit Conrad, he needed to complete a mandatory 10-day quarantine period at home to watch for rabies. She said this was required even though his shots were current and up to date. I felt that guilty feeling wash over me again, the same one from yesterday when I first saw Conrad bleeding. Even though Mushu was defending himself from being hurt, he still bit someone and drew blood. Officer Duffy must have seen the look on my face because she told me not to blame myself or my dog. She said she had reviewed all the evidence and it was clear Mushu was provoked. After she left, I walked around my house taking pictures of everything. I photographed the black scorch marks on my siding near the garage. I took pictures of the burnt spots on my driveway where the fireworks had been set up. I documented the damage to my neighbor's hedge where the small fire had started. Officer Holt had told me last night to build a paper trail of everything that happened. I saved all the photos to a folder on my phone labeled with yesterday's date. Then I drove to urgent care because my chest felt tight and I kept coughing. The doctor listened to my lungs with his stethoscope and said they sounded fine, but he could hear some irritation. He asked about smoke exposure and I explained about hiding in the bathtub during the fireworks. He wrote me a prescription for an inhaler just in case and told me to use it if I had any trouble breathing. Then he typed up notes in his computer about my injuries and stress response from the incident. I asked him for a copy of his notes for my records, and he printed them out right there. I was building my paper trail just like Officer Holt suggested, documenting every single thing that happened and every way it affected me and Mushu. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter around 3 in the morning and woke me up from where I'd fallen asleep on the couch with Mushu. I picked it up and saw a voicemail notification from an unknown number. I pressed play and immediately recognized Gloria's voice, shaking with rage as she spoke from what sounded like a police station holding area. She said she was going to sue me for every penny of Conrad's medical bills and his emotional trauma from the attack. Her voice got louder as she went on about how I'd destroyed our family and chosen a dangerous animal over my own nephew. She said she'd make sure everyone we knew understood what kind of monster I was, that I cared more about a dog than a child who needed stitches. The voicemail ended with her saying her lawyer would be in touch and I'd regret ever getting her arrested. I saved the voicemail and added it to my evidence folder, then tried to go back to sleep but couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. Around 2 that afternoon, someone knocked on my front door, and I looked through the peephole to see my neighbor Hannah standing there with something in her hand. I opened the door and she held up a small USB drive, explaining that her doorbell camera had caught the entire fireworks incident last night. She said the video showed Gloria's face clearly as she set up the rockets and even picked up audio of her talking about making my dog pay. Hannah told me she'd already given a copy to the police, but wanted me to have one too in case I needed it for court or insurance. I thanked her about 5 times and she squeezed my shoulder before heading back to her house. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop right away, but couldn't bring myself to watch it yet. Just knowing it existed felt like enough for now. Instead, I spent the rest of the afternoon making my house more secure, starting with new deadbolt locks on both the front and back doors. I drove to the hardware store and bought the strongest locks they had, plus a motion sensor light for the driveway. I installed everything myself using YouTube videos as guides, testing each lock multiple times to make sure it held firm. Then I took my spare keys from the fake rock by the garage where I used to hide them and found a new hiding spot inside the house that only I knew about. I moved Mushu's bed into my bedroom and set up the heavy-duty crate I'd ordered online last month, lining it with soft blankets so he'd feel safe inside. The crate had a solid door that locked from the outside, and I positioned it in the corner where Mushu could see me from my bed. He sniffed around it cautiously, but eventually walked inside and lay down, which made me feel like I was doing something right. My house was starting to feel less like a home and more like a fortress, but at least Mushu would be protected if anyone tried to get to him again. My father called while I was moving furniture around to make room for Mushu's crate. He asked if we could all sit down as a family and talk through what happened before things got any worse between me and Gloria. I told him I wasn't ready to be in the same room as Gloria or my mother right now, that I needed time to process everything that had happened. He sounded hurt when he responded, but said he understood my feelings. Then he got quiet for a second before mentioning that Conrad had been asking why I hated him so much. I felt that familiar guilt wash over me but pushed it away, reminding myself that Conrad had tortured my dog on purpose and filmed it. I told my father I didn't hate Conrad, but I needed space from everyone right now. He said okay, and we hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, a man named Jack from my insurance company knocked on my door with a clipboard and camera. He explained he was there to assess the damage from the fireworks and take measurements of the burnt siding. He walked around my house with a tape measure, taking photos of every scorch mark and writing notes on his forms. He estimated the repair would cost around $3,000, but said my homeowner's policy would cover most of it after my $500 deductible. Jack mentioned that the insurance company would probably go after Gloria to get their money back through something called subrogation if she got convicted of the charges. He gave me a copy of his assessment report and said someone would call me in a few days to schedule the repairs. After he left, I looked up what subrogation meant and felt relieved that I wouldn't have to personally sue Gloria to get the money back. I called the legal aid office that afternoon and made an appointment with an attorney named Celine to discuss getting a restraining order. The receptionist said Celine had an opening the next day at 10 in the morning. I showed up 15 minutes early with a thick folder containing all my documentation, photos, videos, and reports. Celine met me in a small conference room and listened to my entire story without interrupting once. She reviewed every piece of evidence I'd brought, watching both the security footage and Conrad's phone video with a serious expression. When I finished explaining everything, she said I had an extremely strong case for a protective order against Gloria. She started filling out the paperwork right there, asking me specific questions about dates and times and exact quotes of what Gloria had said. Celine explained the process for getting an emergency hearing and what I should expect when we went before the judge. Her matter-of-fact tone helped me feel less emotional about the whole situation. The next day, I met with Celine again, and she walked me through what would happen at the protective order hearing. She helped me organize all my evidence into a clear timeline that showed exactly how events unfolded. We put the fork incident first, then the firecrackers in the garage, then the bite, then Gloria's threats on the phone, and finally the fireworks attack. Celine had me practice telling my story out loud, coaching me to stay calm and stick to facts without getting defensive or angry. She said judges respond better to people who seem rational and credible rather than emotional and vengeful. We went through potential questions Gloria's lawyer might ask and how I should answer them honestly but briefly. By the end of the session, I felt more prepared and less scared about facing Gloria in court. That same afternoon, the animal control supervisor named Hadley came to my house for the mandatory quarantine home visit. She spent about 30 minutes observing Mushu, watching how he moved around the house and how he reacted to different sounds. She made notes in her report about his body language and the way he flinched at loud noises. Hadley told me she'd seen hundreds of dog bite cases in her career, and this was one of the clearest examples of justified self-defense she'd ever encountered. She said Mushu showed obvious signs of past trauma and fear responses that were consistent with abuse from a previous owner. Before she left, she signed off on the home quarantine paperwork and said I was doing everything right to help Mushu recover. Her validation meant more to me than I expected, and I felt tears starting but held them back until after she drove away. Later that evening, Hannah came back over with her laptop and said she wanted to show me the actual video file from her doorbell camera. I wasn't sure I wanted to see it, but she said it might help me prepare for court. We sat on my couch and she pulled up the footage, which showed Gloria's car pulling up with boxes of fireworks in the passenger seat. The video captured Gloria's face clearly as she got out and started setting up the rockets, positioning them to aim at my house. The audio picked up her voice saying she'd teach me what it felt like when someone I loved got hurt. Watching her deliberate setup made my stomach turn, and I had to pause the video twice to catch my breath. Hannah put her hand on my arm and asked if I wanted to stop, but I said no. I needed to see all of it. The video showed the police arriving and tackling Gloria just as she lit the first fuse. Seeing it from Hannah's perspective made the whole thing feel even more real and terrifying than it had felt hiding in my bathtub. Officer Holt called me that night to give me an update on the charges Gloria was facing. He explained that the prosecutor was likely going to charge her with reckless endangerment for shooting fireworks at an occupied house, attempted arson for trying to start a fire, and possibly assault depending on how the district attorney's office reviewed the case. He asked how I was holding up and I told him I was managing but scared about what Gloria might do next. Holt said domestic cases like this were always the hardest because families got torn apart no matter how things turned out. He promised to keep me updated on any developments and told me to call him immediately if Gloria tried to contact me or came anywhere near my house. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from various family members. My phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. I opened Facebook and saw that Gloria had posted a massive rant overnight claiming I had sicked my vicious rescue dog on her innocent son who was just playing. Her version of events was completely twisted. She wrote that Conrad was gently petting Mushu when the dog suddenly attacked him without warning. She posted photos of Conrad's bandaged arm and wrote about how traumatized he was. The comment section was filled with family members offering support and saying they always knew that dog was dangerous. My aunt wrote that rescue dogs should never be trusted around children. My cousin said I was irresponsible for keeping an aggressive animal. I felt sick reading through all the lies, but I forced myself to screenshot every single post and comment. I saved everything to a folder on my computer labeled evidence. Then I blocked Gloria on Facebook, Instagram, and every other social media platform I could think of. I adjusted all my privacy settings so she couldn't see anything I posted or commented on. Celine had told me during our last meeting to let Gloria keep talking, because every lie she told publicly would hurt her credibility in court. The more she contradicted the video evidence, the worse she would look to a judge. That same day, I noticed Mushu was acting strange. Every time a door slammed or a car backfired outside, he would start shaking and panting heavily. His whole body would go stiff and his eyes would get wide with fear. I couldn't even close a cabinet without him flinching. I called the vet clinic and asked if they had anyone who specialized in animal behavior and trauma. The receptionist gave me the name of Jasmine Woods, who worked there 2 days a week. I made an appointment for that afternoon. When we got to the clinic, Jasmine spent almost an hour observing Mushu and asking me detailed questions about what happened with Conrad. She watched how Mushu reacted when she dropped a book on the floor. He immediately tried to hide under the exam table. She explained that he was having panic attacks triggered by loud noises because Conrad had terrorized him with firecrackers. She prescribed anti-anxiety medication and gave me information about a training program that could help him recover. The medication would take a few weeks to fully work, but it should help calm his nervous system. She also recommended I create a safe space for him at home where he could retreat when he felt scared. The next day, Celine and I went to the courthouse to file the paperwork for a temporary protective order. The clerk at the window looked over all my documentation, including the videos, police reports, and witness statements from Hannah. She scheduled an emergency hearing for 3 days from now and issued a temporary no-contact order that would be effective until the hearing. The order said Gloria couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my house and couldn't contact me directly or through other people. Walking out of the courthouse with that paperwork in my hand, I finally felt like I was taking control of the situation instead of just reacting to Gloria's chaos. I had spent so many days feeling helpless and scared, but now I was actively protecting myself through the legal system. That afternoon, Jack the insurance adjuster called me back with his full report. He confirmed the damage estimate was right around $3,000 for replacing the siding and cleaning up the scorch marks. He explained that my homeowner's insurance would cover it minus my $500 deductible. Then he told me something interesting. He said if Gloria got convicted of the criminal charges, the insurance company would definitely go after her to recover what they paid out. The subrogation process was separate from any criminal restitution she might owe. That meant she could end up paying for the damage twice, once to the insurance company, and once as part of her criminal sentence. I thanked him for the information and hung up feeling a bit better about the financial side of things. 2 days later, my father showed up at my door without calling first. I saw his car pull up and felt my stomach drop. He knocked softly and asked if we could talk. I let him in but stayed standing near the door. He started by saying he understood I was upset, but asked if I would consider dropping the protective order for the sake of family unity. He said Gloria was sorry, even though she hadn't actually said those words to me herself. He mentioned that Conrad was having nightmares and was traumatized by everything that happened. I took a deep breath and told him that Gloria literally tried to burn down my house with fireworks. I said I wasn't backing down just to make everyone comfortable. He looked hurt, but I held firm. I explained that until Gloria took real responsibility for her actions and stopped blaming Mushu for defending himself, I needed legal protection from her. My father nodded slowly and left without arguing further. That evening, my mother left me a voicemail. Her voice was cold and angry. She said she wouldn't be visiting my house anymore as long as I had that dangerous dog. She called me selfish and cruel for keeping an animal that hurt a child. She said I was choosing a pet over my own family, and that she was ashamed of me. Listening to her words felt like being punched in the stomach. Part of me wanted to call her back and explain everything again, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She had already decided that Mushu was the villain and nothing I said would change her mind. I saved the voicemail to my evidence folder just in case and tried not to cry. The next morning, I received an official-looking envelope in the mail from Animal Control. Inside was a written assessment from Officer Duffy. The report stated clearly that Mushu's bite was a direct response to sustained provocation and abuse. It explicitly noted that Conrad's actions with the firecrackers constituted animal cruelty under state law. The report also mentioned that Mushu showed remarkable restraint by only biting once when he easily could have done much more damage. Officer Duffy wrote that in her professional opinion, Mushu posed no danger to the public and should not face any restrictions or penalties. This document would be crucial evidence at the protective order hearing. I made 3 copies and gave one to Celine right away. My father called me that evening with an update. He said Gloria had been formally cited by the prosecutor's office and received a court date for her arraignment on the criminal charges. According to him, Gloria was telling the whole extended family that I was the one who should be arrested for having a vicious animal. She had apparently convinced herself that she was the real victim in all of this. She was saying the police were corrupt, and that the videos had been edited to make her look bad. My father sounded exhausted trying to deal with her delusions. I thanked him for keeping me informed, but told him I couldn't discuss Gloria with him anymore because it was too stressful. 3 days later, I sat in the courthouse waiting room with Celine before the protective order hearing. My hands were shaking as we went over my testimony one last time. When we entered the courtroom, I saw Gloria sitting on the opposite side with her attorney. She glared at me with pure hatred. The judge called the hearing to order and asked me to take the stand. I testified about everything that happened, starting with Conrad pulling Mushu's ears and tail at the party. I explained how I had locked Mushu in my bedroom for safety, but Conrad stole my keys. I described finding Conrad in the garage with the firecrackers and Mushu's terrified reaction. I talked about the bite and how Animal Control had reviewed all the evidence. Then I testified about Gloria's threats on the phone and her showing up with boxes of fireworks aimed at my house. The judge watched all the video evidence on a large screen. He read through Officer Duffy's Animal Control report carefully. Hannah testified as a witness about what she saw from her doorbell camera. The judge asked Gloria's attorney if she had any evidence that contradicted the videos. Her attorney admitted she didn't have anything that disputed what the cameras had captured. The judge granted a temporary no-contact order effective immediately. He said the order would remain in place and scheduled a full hearing in 2 weeks to determine if it should become permanent. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like I could finally breathe again. 2 days after the protective order hearing, my father called to tell me that Conrad's school counselor wanted to talk to me. He said the counselor's name was Louis Mann, and he was working with Conrad on therapy related to the incident. Louis wanted my perspective to help Conrad process what happened and understand the consequences of his actions. I listened to my father explain this and felt my chest tighten with stress. I told him politely that I wasn't comfortable having any contact with Conrad or anyone on Gloria's side right now, not even through a therapist. I suggested that Louis could review the video evidence if he wanted to understand what actually happened, since the footage showed everything clearly. My father sounded disappointed, but said he understood. He hung up without pushing further. I sat on my couch afterward feeling guilty for saying no, but I knew I needed to protect my own mental health right now. The next morning, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox from a law office I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal demand letter on expensive letterhead from an attorney named Catherine Diaz. The letter claimed I owed Gloria $25,000 for Conrad's medical bills, pain and suffering and emotional distress caused by my dangerous animal. It used legal language to make everything sound official and threatening. My hands shook as I read through the 3-page letter listing all the ways they planned to pursue me if I didn't pay within 30 days. I didn't respond directly or call the number listed. Instead, I immediately scanned the entire letter and forwarded it to Celine and to my insurance company. Celine called me back within an hour and told me this was a classic intimidation tactic. She said to ignore it completely and not to communicate with Catherine Diaz under any circumstances. She explained that Gloria's attorney was trying to scare me into settling before the criminal case was resolved. Hearing Celine's calm, professional voice helped me stop panicking. 10 days after the bite incident, Animal Control officially completed Mushu's quarantine period. Officer Duffy came by for a final check and confirmed he showed no signs of rabies, exactly as expected given his vaccination records. She handed me a formal closure letter stating the case was resolved and all restrictions on Mushu were removed. I felt relief wash over me as I read the official document. That same afternoon, I started the behavioral training program that Jasmine Woods had recommended. I set up a quiet space in my living room and played recordings of fireworks and loud noises at very low volumes. Mushu would flinch at first, but I'd give him treats and calm reassurance until he relaxed. We did these exercises for 15 minutes each evening, slowly building his tolerance. The first few sessions were rough because he'd start shaking even at low volumes. But by the end of the week, I could see tiny improvements in how quickly he calmed down. Hannah stopped by while I was outside with Mushu in the backyard a few days later. She asked how I was holding up and said she'd been thinking about me. I told her about the protective order and the demand letter, and she shook her head in disbelief at Gloria's behavior. Hannah said she'd be happy to testify at any future hearings if I needed her to. She mentioned that the whole neighborhood had seen what Gloria did that night, and most people were on my side. Several neighbors had apparently asked her about the incident and expressed concern for me. Hearing this made me feel less isolated, even though my own family had mostly turned against me. I thanked Hannah for her support and for the doorbell footage that had been so crucial. She gave me a hug and told me to call if I needed anything. Having at least one person in my corner who wasn't being paid to help me meant more than I could express. Over the next few days, I sat down at my computer and created a detailed timeline document of everything that had happened. I started from the moment Conrad first spotted Mushu at the party and went through every incident chronologically. I added timestamps from the security footage and Conrad's phone video. I included photos of the firecracker burns on the garage floor, the scorch marks on my siding, and screenshots of Gloria's social media posts. I attached copies of the animal control reports, the police reports, and Hannah's doorbell camera footage. I organized witness statements from Hannah and the responding officers. By the time I finished, the document was 23 pages long with clear sections and an index. Having everything laid out so clearly helped me feel less overwhelmed and more prepared for whatever came next. I sent the complete packet to Celine for her review. She called me the next day and said it was one of the most thorough evidence compilations she'd ever seen from a client. She said this level of documentation would be incredibly valuable for any future proceedings. My father called again a week later with unexpected news. He told me that Child Protective Services had showed up at Gloria's house to do a welfare check on Conrad. Someone had reported concerns about the home environment after the fireworks incident became public. The CPS worker interviewed Gloria and Conrad separately and inspected the house. My father said Gloria was absolutely furious and convinced I was the one who called them, even though I honestly hadn't. I told my father I had no idea who made the report, which was the truth. He believed me but said Gloria was telling everyone I was trying to destroy her family. The CPS visit had apparently shaken her badly because she realized how serious the situation had become. My father sounded exhausted trying to manage Gloria's anger while also staying in contact with me. I felt bad for putting him in the middle, but I wasn't going to apologize for protecting myself. The following Monday, I had to have an uncomfortable conversation with my boss at work. I explained in general terms that I was dealing with a family legal situation that would require me to attend court hearings and meetings with attorneys over the next few months. I asked if there was any way I could have flexible hours or work from home on days when I had appointments. My boss listened carefully and asked a few basic questions without prying into details. She told me she appreciated me being upfront about the situation and said we could definitely work something out. She approved me to work remotely on court days as long as I kept up with my deadlines and stayed available by email. I was incredibly grateful for her understanding, but also embarrassed that my family drama was affecting my professional life. I'd always kept work and personal life completely separate before this. Around this same time, I noticed that several of Gloria's friends who had initially supported her online had gone quiet. When the police report became public record, people could see the actual facts of the case. The report contradicted everything Gloria had claimed in her social media posts. People were starting to realize she'd lied about Conrad just playing innocently, and Mushu attacking unprovoked. A few of her friends even deleted their supportive comments from her posts. I didn't feel vindicated or happy about this. Mostly I just felt tired of the whole situation and wished it would all be over. I wanted my life back and to stop thinking about Gloria and Conrad every single day. My insurance company finally sent me the official letter about the siding repair coverage. They confirmed they'd cover $2,500 of the repair costs after I paid my $500 deductible. Jack called me to explain the breakdown and mentioned again that the insurance company would pursue Gloria for reimbursement through subrogation once the criminal case was resolved. He said this was standard procedure when another party was clearly at fault for property damage. I was relieved I wouldn't have to pay the full $3,000 out of pocket. The deductible was manageable even though it hurt to spend that money on damage Gloria had caused. Jack scheduled the repair crew to come out the following week to replace the damaged siding. Every evening after work, I continued Mushu's desensitization training program. I gradually increased the volume of the recorded fireworks and other loud noises by small increments each session. Mushu was making slow but steady progress. He could now stay relatively calm at low to moderate volumes as long as I was there with treats and reassurance. When a truck backfired on the street one afternoon, he flinched but didn't have a full panic attack like he would have 2 weeks earlier. I called Jasmine Woods to give her an update on his progress. She said his improvement was a good sign that he could recover from the trauma with time and patience. She reminded me that healing wasn't linear, and there would probably be setbacks along the way. But overall, she was pleased with how well he was responding to the training. Watching Mushu slowly get better gave me hope that we'd both eventually heal from everything that had happened. A few days later, Brady called my cell while I was at work. He got right to the point and explained that his office was thinking about offering Gloria a plea deal instead of taking the case to trial. The deal would charge her with reckless endangerment and she'd get probation, mandatory counseling, and have to pay back all the property damage costs. He asked how I felt about her avoiding jail time versus going through a full trial. I told him I wasn't trying to destroy Gloria's life, but I needed her to face real consequences and get help for her anger problems. Brady said he understood, and that he'd keep me updated on what Gloria's attorney said about the offer. That same evening, my father showed up at my door looking worse than I'd ever seen him. His face had new lines and his shoulders slumped forward like he was carrying something heavy. He sat at my kitchen table and practically begged me to agree to a light plea deal, so Gloria wouldn't end up with a criminal record that would follow her forever. I could see how much this whole situation was killing him, watching his 2 daughters on opposite sides of a legal battle. I told him I wouldn't push for jail time, but I needed Gloria on probation with counseling, and the protective order had to stay in place. He nodded slowly and thanked me for being reasonable, then left without saying much else. 2 days after that conversation, Brady called again with frustrating news. Gloria had rejected the plea offer completely through Catherine. She was insisting she did nothing wrong and wanted to take everything to trial. Catherine was arguing that Gloria acted out of justified anger over her son getting hurt, and that the charges were way too harsh. Brady explained this meant we'd have to prepare for a full trial with witness testimony and everything. I felt my stomach drop because I'd been hoping Gloria would just accept responsibility and move on. Around this time, my father mentioned during a brief phone call that Conrad had started going to weekly counseling sessions at the school with Lewis. He said Conrad was having bad dreams and seemed to be struggling with guilt about what happened, even though Gloria kept telling him he didn't do anything wrong. Hearing that made me feel genuinely bad for Conrad despite everything he'd put Mushu through. He was just a kid caught in the middle of adult problems, and his mother wasn't helping him process what he'd actually done. I hoped the counseling would help him understand empathy and consequences in ways Gloria clearly couldn't teach him. The court scheduled the hearing for the permanent protective order, and I spent the next several days preparing my testimony with Celine at her office. We practiced staying calm and sticking to facts, going over what questions Catherine might ask to try to make me look bad. Celine had me rehearse explaining the fork incident, the firecrackers in the garage, and Gloria's attack with the fireworks without getting emotional or defensive. I was nervous about sitting in the same courtroom as Gloria, but I was determined to see this through and get the protection I needed. During this same period, Jack called to tell me that Gloria's insurance company had reached out to my insurance company about settling the property damage claims separately from the criminal case. He explained this was pretty normal and that the 2 companies would work it out directly without me having to do anything. It was a relief to have one less thing on my plate to worry about. I also sat down with both my parents at a coffee shop and laid out clear boundaries for moving forward. I told them I wouldn't discuss Gloria or Conrad with them anymore. They couldn't bring Gloria to my house under any circumstances, and they needed to stop pressuring me to drop the protective order. My mother looked offended and started to argue, but my father put his hand on her arm and quietly agreed to respect my terms. The morning of the protective order hearing finally arrived, and I walked into the courthouse with Celine beside me. Gloria sat across the courtroom with Catherine, glaring at me the entire time. When it was my turn to testify, I explained everything that happened, starting with Conrad pulling Mushu's ears and tail, then the fork incident, then him stealing my keys to drag Mushu to the garage and terrorize him with firecrackers. I described coming home to find Gloria setting up rockets aimed at my house and hiding in the bathtub while calling for help. Celine presented all the security footage, the animal control report from Officer Duffy, and Hannah's testimony about what she witnessed from her doorbell camera. The judge watched every video carefully, then asked Catherine if she had any evidence that contradicted what the videos clearly showed. Catherine admitted she didn't have any contradicting evidence. The judge took less than 5 minutes to make his decision. He granted a full protective order valid for 12 months with strict rules that Gloria couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my home. All communication between us had to go through our attorneys for insurance and legal stuff only. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me as the judge read out the order terms. Gloria's face turned red, but she didn't say anything. 2 days after the hearing, Brady called with the news I'd been waiting for. Gloria had accepted a plea deal through Catherine that morning. She pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment and got 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and a ban on possessing any fireworks. She also had to pay back all the costs for fixing my siding and other property damage plus court fees. Brady said the deal was fair given the circumstances and that Gloria would face serious jail time if she violated any part of her probation. I thanked him for keeping me informed through the whole process and hung up feeling like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Jack called 3 days later with news about the insurance claim. He explained that my insurance company had approved the full payout for the property damage and they were moving forward with subrogation against Gloria as part of her restitution. The repairs would be scheduled within the next 2 weeks once the contractor had an opening. I felt the financial pressure ease knowing I wouldn't be stuck paying for damage Gloria caused. Jack walked me through the paperwork I needed to sign and said his company would handle collecting from Gloria directly through the court system. It was one less thing I had to worry about dealing with myself. The next morning, Jack called again with even better news. Gloria's insurance company had settled Conrad's medical bills directly with the hospital without involving me at all. Jack said this was the best possible outcome because it meant no civil lawsuit and no ongoing financial fights between our families. The legal pieces and money issues were finally falling into place after weeks of uncertainty. I thanked him for handling everything so professionally and hung up feeling like the worst of the crisis was actually behind me. That afternoon, I took Mushu to his regular training session with the behavioral specialist Dr. Woods had recommended. We practiced his desensitization exercises using recorded sounds at gradually increasing volumes. Mushu managed to stay calm through moderate noise levels that would have sent him into a panic attack just a few weeks ago. Dr. Woods watched him carefully and made notes about his progress. She said his improvement was significant enough that we could reduce his anxiety medication slightly and see how he handled it. Watching Mushu slowly recover gave me real hope that we would both heal from everything that happened. The trauma wouldn't disappear overnight, but seeing concrete progress made it feel possible. My father showed up at my door the following Saturday afternoon for his first visit since I set the new boundaries. He looked nervous standing on my porch holding a bag of bagels from the bakery we used to go to together. I let him in, and we sat at the kitchen table eating breakfast food at 3 in the afternoon like we sometimes did when I was younger. He didn't mention Gloria or Conrad once during the whole visit. We just talked about his garden and my work and normal everyday things that had nothing to do with the crisis. It wasn't the easy relationship we had before everything exploded, but it was something. When he left 2 hours later, I felt okay about it. The next day, I bought flowers and a thank you card for Hannah. I walked over to her house and rang the doorbell, feeling a little awkward about the whole gesture. Hannah opened the door and smiled when she saw the bouquet. I thanked her for everything she did during the fireworks incident and for being willing to testify if needed. She told me she was just glad everything worked out and that she would have done the same for any neighbor. We chatted on her porch for a few minutes about normal neighborhood stuff. Walking back to my house, I realized the street felt like a community again, instead of a place where I was constantly watching my back. A few days later, my father called to say that Lewis, Conrad's school counselor, wanted to request something through him. Lewis was asking if I would provide a written statement about what happened for Conrad's therapy records. I thought about it for a day before deciding to do it. I sat down and wrote a factual summary focusing on the actual events without blaming Conrad personally or making it sound like he was a terrible kid. I described the fork incident, the firecrackers in the garage, Mushu biting in self-defense, and Gloria's retaliation with the fireworks. I kept my tone neutral and just stated what happened in order. I hoped reading it might help Conrad understand the real consequences of his actions without crushing him completely. I sent the statement to my father to pass along to Lewis. That weekend, I went to 3 different stores and bought white noise machines for the living room, bedroom, and hallway. I set them all up and tested different sound settings until I found ones that created a peaceful background hum throughout the house. Then I cleared out a corner of the living room and set up a dedicated calm space for Mushu with his favorite bed, all his toys, and a soft blanket. I put up a baby gate so he could see out, but have his own protected area when he needed it. The house was starting to feel peaceful again, instead of like a place where bad things happened. Small routines and normal daily life were gradually coming back. On Tuesday morning, I opened my email and found a message from Gloria's attorney. My stomach clenched when I saw the sender name, but I made myself read it. The email was brief and formal, acknowledging the protective order terms and confirming that Gloria would comply with all contact restrictions. The tone was cold and businesslike, but at least it wasn't hostile or threatening. She wasn't fighting anymore or trying to find ways around the court order. It was more than I expected, honestly. My father came by again 2 weeks after his first visit, and we fell into the same comfortable pattern of just spending time together without discussing the elephant in the room. Near the end of his visit, he mentioned that Conrad's counseling sessions were really helping him understand empathy and consequences. Apparently, Conrad had been doing exercises about how his actions affect other people and animals, and he was starting to take real responsibility for what he did. My father said Conrad even asked if there was a way he could apologize to Mushu someday, though obviously that wasn't possible with the protective order. I told my father I was cautiously hopeful that Conrad would grow from this experience and maybe become a better person because of it. The repair crew showed up on Thursday morning with their truck full of materials and tools. They spent 2 full days replacing the damaged siding and pressure washing the scorch marks off the driveway and front walk. I stayed inside with Mushu during the loud parts so he wouldn't get stressed by the noise. When they finally finished on Friday afternoon, I walked outside to look at the house. The new siding matched perfectly, and all the black marks were gone. Standing there on my front lawn looking at my house, it finally felt like home again instead of a crime scene. The physical evidence of that terrible night had disappeared, even if the memories would probably stay with me forever. That weekend, I sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote out exactly what I needed for any future family events. No Gloria or Conrad at my house ever. No surprise visits from anyone. No guilt trips about dropping the protective order. No pressure to forgive before I'm ready. I wrote it all down in clear bullet points so there wouldn't be any confusion later. When my father stopped by on Tuesday, I showed him the list and explained these were my boundaries going forward. He read through it slowly, nodding at each point. He folded the paper and put it in his wallet, then told me he understood and would respect what I needed. Having those boundaries written down and agreed to made me feel like I had some control back instead of just reacting to whatever happened next. A few nights later, I took Mushu out for our evening walk around the block just as the sun was setting. We were halfway down the street when someone's backyard party started up, and I heard the sharp crack of fireworks going off a few houses away. Mushu stopped walking and his whole body went stiff. He looked up at me with those worried eyes, waiting to see how I would react. I knelt down beside him and gave him the calm signal we'd been practicing with Dr. Woods, placing my hand on his chest and taking slow breaths. Another firework went off and he flinched but didn't try to run. After a few seconds, he relaxed a little and started walking again, staying close to my leg. It wasn't perfect, and he was still nervous, but he recovered way faster than he would have a month ago. I was really proud of how far he'd come with the training. The next morning, my father texted asking if I wanted to meet for coffee at the shop on Main Street. I agreed because it felt safer than having him at my house where we might get interrupted. We sat at a corner table with our drinks, and he started the conversation by saying he wished things were different with the family. He admitted that Gloria and I probably needed to stay apart for now, and that pushing for some big reconciliation wouldn't help anyone. I told him I appreciated that he was respecting my boundaries, and that I still wanted to have a relationship with him, even if things with Gloria were complicated. We agreed to keep meeting like this, just the two of us, without forcing anything that neither Gloria nor I were ready for. That night, I was back home with Mushu curled up in his bed next to my chair, while I read a book I'd been trying to finish for weeks. I'd logged out of the family group text earlier that day, and put my phone on Do Not Disturb mode so I wouldn't see any messages until morning. The house was quiet except for Mushu's soft breathing and the occasional page turn. Life wasn't perfect, and my family relationships were still a mess. But I'd protected what mattered most to me and built a home that felt safe and peaceful for both of us. And that's the end of this one. I love when a simple story carries something you can actually use in real life. If it sparked a thought or gave you a fresh perspective, that's the goal. Subscribe so you can catch the next one when it drops.